Hello, everyone, and welcome to Is the Virtualization Shakeup Causing Market Upheaval? Today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Keith Ward. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I am super pumped to be your moderator for this special event today. First, though, I need to cover some housekeeping items for you. Leading off, we want your questions. Just drop them in the questions box in your webinar control panel right there, should be on your right. Now, that Q&A panel does a lot of different duties. It also is a place to tell us where you're logging in from today. We love hearing from where you originate, so let us know that. Now, that Q&A panel, the third duty it serves is to let us know about any technical issues that you might be having. If something goes sideways, if you can't hear something, see something, if things just go wrong in general, give your browser a quick refresh. That should be your first order of business. Sometimes you need to give it 2 refreshes to get it to work properly. If that still doesn't work well, then let us know in the Q&A and we will hop on it right away and help you out. All right, second up here, we've got some great free resources in that handout section. That's right next to that Q&A tab. I'd especially like to call your attention to 2 awesome handouts from Veeam today. There's a research report on weighing VMware alternatives and a link to information on migration resources. Now, those sound like some fantastic things that you really should be adding to your knowledge base. So head over to the handout section and download those now. In the handout section, you'll also find a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of more upcoming events like this one. Check out that calendar, see what events strike your fancy, and sign up. We got a whole bunch coming up this month and into December as well. Okay, finally, at the end of this webinar event, we are going to be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one of you listening to my voice right now. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of that prize drawing can also be found in the handout section. Scroll to the bottom and you will see the link with the details right there. All right, that's enough of the housekeeping stuff. Let's get to the main event. What do you say? It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today, Jason Buffington, Vice President of Market Strategy for Veeam, Alan Baptista, Principal Product Marketing Manager, and James Janney, Enterprise System Engineer with Veeam. That is a solid team that we have got to present today. Cannot wait to hear what they have to say. Jason is ready to kick this off, so I'm going to turn this over to him right now. Jason, you have the floor.
Hi, I'm Jason Buffington with Veeam Software. Super excited to share this event with you. One of the questions I think everybody has been asking for a long time is the Broadcom VMware shakeup. How is that actually affecting market? Well, to answer that question, I partnered with my friend Alan Baptista, and we went out to CIO Magazine and had them interview 550 executives, CIO types, all focused on their Broadcom strategies. Let's go ahead and bring up the summary of that data really quick. So earlier this year, we asked them, hey, what are you thinking about the Broadcom merger? And is this affecting your strategy for how you use VMware? And if you're going to reduce your strategy, how quickly are you going to do that? And what are you going to go to? And what do you think it's going to cost you? And really looking at that executive lens along the way. Alan, introduce yourself, and then what were you most excited about in this project?
Yeah, my name is Alan Baptista, and I'm the product marketing manager here at Veeam for a little over 6 months. So it's a pleasure this was my very first big project, and there's some cool insights in terms of what organizations are looking at, where they're going towards, some really cool nuggets that we'll be covering in the webinar later on.
Okay, so with much ado, let's jump into it. So some of the first questions, certainly when you're going to look at, hey, how is virtualization going to change? Well, first, let's figure out how much virtualization are we really talking about? Right. So one of the questions that Veeam has been asking for years, in fact, in our data protection trends report, this is a common measure that we use, is the senior executives were asked, what percentage of your infrastructure is either physical servers still running within the data center, virtual machines running within the data center, or cloud hosted instances? So pick your favorite: Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, et cetera, along the way. And Alan, I think it's interesting here that about, what is it, 57%, so not a little over half, is either physical servers or already cloud hosted. So it's running on either real metal or cloudy metal. But for 2 out of 5 workloads, 43% of the production workloads that are currently out there are running as virtual machines. Now, just to kind of draw this picture out, though, let's flesh out the rest of the screen, though, because we asked, okay, so let's look at that virtualization environment. Let's look at that green wedge in a little bit more detail. Here are 2 fun facts that you should, as the kids at home, ought to compare against your own data. They said of that virtualized environment in the green wedge in the bottom of the left-hand side, 82% of production VMs run on the vSphere hypervisor. Right? So there's a lot of hypervisors out there, but for 4 out of 5, if that workload is virtualized, it's running on top of vSphere. And in fact, when asked, well, what about all the other hypervisors that are out there? Of the 550 organizations that were surveyed, 58% of them said vSphere is the only hypervisor they're running in production. Alan, as we look at the breadth of environments that are out there and how this Broadcom angst might create change, this paints a pretty interesting canvas for that change to occur on, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We had a hypothesis that we were expecting a lot more people to go to the cloud. And when in reality, it still shows that it's pretty divvied up if you really take a look at it. There's still going to be some physical servers independent of what hypervisor they're going to be using, right? So that was a really interesting finding for me, at least.
Yeah, and we've been tracking this same question in data protection trends for the last several years, and habitually we always still see around a fourth of all production workloads continue to run on physical servers. And I'm just going to say, in 2024, if you have workloads that are running on physical, it's probably because it really does need to be on physical infrastructure, right? By 2024, virtualization is so mature, IaaS and PaaS are so mature. If you're still running on physical, there's probably reasons why you're still running on that. Now, if this is the canvas on which the angst and change might occur, let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So one of the, let's call it the money questions from this particular survey, 550 unbiased CIOs, asked the question, based on the recent changes by Broadcom, how likely are you to decrease your usage of VMware over the next 12 months? All right, so let's call things out first. There's 28%, so roughly 1 out of 4 is neutral, right? So no real change. So I'm just going to draw out the really big red and yellow wedges compared to the much smaller green wedges that you see on the screen. So what do we got? 56% say they're either likely or very likely to decrease their use of VMware based on the sentiment they're seeing from those execs as it relates to Broadcom, as opposed to only 16 say, no, we're probably pretty good. So let's make sure we got this right. 56% likely to change, 16 unlikely. It's a, what do we call that? Almost 4-to-1 ratio along that way. I will say that surprises me. Now we're going to look at timing and practicality of that. But Alan, I think this is an interesting lens. Let's fold this out though, because when you look at okay, so you want to change, what does that actually look like? I think one of the most interesting pieces of data, and again, for the folks watching at home, look at what you're going to be doing right now, because we're coming up in the end of 2024. You're thinking about budgets. You're thinking about renewal cycles. 47% of the respondents, even though they said they were likely to change, actually said, okay, for this next year, we're probably going to cut about the same check, right? It's going to renew the licensing about as is or minimal change. And yet, well, more than half of organizations have a plan to either start migrating to other hypervisors on premises or to other clouds or both. Alan, does it surprise you, though, that about half of folks are still going to cut that same check one more time?
We were asking about the timing in particular. And I think because of the changes were, let's say, drastic in a way, and the dependency that organizations have on their VM infrastructure, it makes that a very tough decision. It's a big check, but it is a big decision to make that change. So we were really worried about and wondering about the timing of how their transition was going to happen. So it didn't surprise me that we're going to look at it the first renewal, and then we'll evaluate it with time and which structures will remain in VMware, which will move away from that. So it's very plausible to me.
Got it. Okay, so we're going to keep on going down this journey and get a little bit more into the weeds. So they said very likely over the next 12 months, let's look a little bit more detail on what that actually looks like. So if you're going to be migrating, remember, we had a good chunk of folks that were migrating to other on-prem hypervisors, a good chunk of folks starting to migrate some workloads into cloud-hosted infrastructure as a service. How long do you think it's going to take? And on average, we see that about a third of folks think that they're going to do this within the next 6 months. Another not quite third within 12 months. And you can see the remaining third are going to take a year or more to get this done along the way. Well, if you're going to talk about migrating, certainly one of the questions as a technology company that we're interested in is where are you going to migrate to? And so one of the questions that we asked along those lines is, okay, so what are you thinking about for your next hypervisors and such? So the color coding on this, by the way, is the green are on-premises hypervisors, whereas the blue are cloud-hosted workloads. And so when folks were asked, number one, as far as where they're planning going, probably to Hyper-V. Not quite a percentage point behind that, going to cloud hosted on IaaS-based infrastructure. And then, Alan, I think it's kind of interesting. It almost goes back and forth along the way. And perhaps more notably, there's not a single preferred destination of choice. If you go to, hey, I want to fly into Orlando and I can't get to Orlando, I'm going to fly into Tampa, right? There's not a, okay, I'll go here instead kind of thing. It's a pretty wide gap, isn't it?
Yeah, there wasn't a clear winner, if you may, as you're looking at these numbers. And the other aspect important to realize is this: the survey was really focused on enterprise organizations of 1,000 employees or more. I don't think we mentioned that. So not surprising, Proxmox is at the lower end because we have an expectation of Proxmox really being catered toward the small and medium-sized organizations. But really that aspect of cloud versus on-prem is very clear and apparent here on these stats. So it ties into that first question that we covered earlier.
Yeah, I am intrigued by the balance of we think we know about how long it's going to take to get there. And yet the rationale for where they're going to go actually is really, really diverse. And I think that really makes for an interesting dynamic because for many organizations, as we saw on the first slide, VMware was the choice of hypervisors, period. It's going to be in production, you're going to run vSphere. And in this case, it looks like the industry is taking the opportunity to diversify where these workloads are going to go along the way. Now, when you do diversify, when you do embrace a different platform than what you have standardized on, grown up with, cut your teeth on, invested in, skilled in, when you go through that, you are going to often see a lot of change and angst around what that change might actually occur. And so one of the questions asked was, what are your top challenges related to migrating from VMware? Now, what you're looking at on the screen, by the way, and in fact, this is probably one, it's an eye chart. So let's go ahead and blow that up to full screen if we can. You're going to see that the light blue lines are all the big ones that are out there. Choose all that apply. And then the purple lines is when you have a single most concerning point, what is that primary concern? Now, these are sorted by choose all, and you can see that lack of management tools for that new hypervisor comes in top of mind. Feature parity comes in top of mind. I would also point out to you, take a look towards the middle of the screen, the two sets of gray bars. This actually gets me more anxious than anything else. We haven't determined our strategy yet. We haven't figured out where the day is going to go yet. Right. And so there's a lot of we don't know yet that I think is framing in that. But Alan, you spent a lot of time in this industry up until now. The fact that we're angst around parity of management, parity of features, even just the complexity of running multi-hypervisors in production as opposed to one, this seems like operational challenges is really trumping what folks are concerned about. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. That demonstrates that the functionality and the feature parity that organizations have had with VMware is preeminent and prevalent here. That the manageability of extensive sets of environments and the coverage that VM has in these organizations is impactful. So it is a big decision. It goes back to that uncertainty that people don't know what they want to do. So that is, they're evaluating, comparing their options, and really considering where to go next, how much to move, or if at all, and where. So great points.
All right, so we're going to keep going down the rat hole of the problems associated with this kind of angst. So let's talk about some of the questions that these CIOs of these enterprises, good call out. All organizations had to have at least 1,000 employees. Many of them had 10,000, 20,000 or more. So this is very much an enterprise-centric lens on the problems of the shifting landscape according to the Broadcom shifts. So some of the things that were also asked of the CIOs is, okay, if you're going to change your usage of VMware, for many of them, it's not about migrating to a different hypervisor. For some of them, it was simply around, we're going to tier down our vSphere licenses to something that we can then use the same hypervisor, but perhaps a different kind of management experience. And so some of the questions were around that idea of, if you're changing your usage, what's going to change capability-wise, right? That was also number 2 in our overall angst. So the shifting of tiers, and then what are the capabilities of that, certainly when you go from the more enterprise SKUs down, I think that's going to be a challenge for some folks. They talk about the differences between going from an ELA or an enterprise-centric license to a non-ELA. I know for many organizations that then starts to affect things like portability, right? So if you're using an enterprise license, you can, it's like a buffet, eat all you want. When you actually have to start naming hypervisors and naming where workloads are, that's going to create some angst. I think it's probably most interesting if you look at that tiny little gray wedge in the bottom of the screen. 14%, 1 in 7 organizations said, no problem, no changes here, right? That means, flip the math, 6 out of 7 organizations are feeling at least one of these sources of angst up above. And simply then we said, okay, so what's going to happen because of that? And so when you look at those top concerns, portability comes in again. We see audits coming in, right? So because if you have to measure where everything is, and I want to decommission a license that's in Brazil and spin up a new license that's in Spain, okay, that's going to cause a problem for my auditors. And so you see a lot more of those kinds of flex along the way. Alan, you spent a lot of time in enterprise IT over the years. When we think about things like portability and licensing tiers, this is a pretty common pain that CIOs have had for years, isn't it?
Absolutely. And as well, compliance is a big factor as well in terms of the data, where it's going and how it's being transitioned. So it's more, the decisions the enterprise are making are really more in the strategic levels. It's really not in the nuts and bolts, because the options are very much comparable in terms of functionality, as we all know. It's really how that transition, how the change will alter processes and people's knowledge, and how they can transition, and how their experience is going to be using that tool, the new tool going forward, if that's the case.
Totally agree. One of the other things when you do these kinds of shifts, they say that leadership can be a very lonely place. And so when we look at how are they going to navigate all the changes that are out there, let's find out if they're going to be lonely in that. I actually think this was one of the more interesting questions in the survey was when Foundry, the firm that actually went off and asked these questions to these unbiased CIOs, they asked them, is your current source of VMware also a Broadcom customer? Right. And we see there's actually 3 interesting wedges that kind of come out of this. The red upper left hand corner, 29% say that the partner that they got their VMware from, who used to do their licensing and perhaps some of their implementation, et cetera, will not or is not a Broadcom customer, which means they're not going to be able to help them with the next step of that journey, at least as far as mitigating licensing and tiering. There's 30%, the yellow wedge in the upper right-hand corner, that said, we actually purchased our VMware directly, which as an enterprise, you would expect. That, again, means they're not going to be there to help them navigate whatever that change is. Unfortunately, that means only 41%, only 2 out of 5 organizations. The partner that helped them with vSphere will also be a Broadcom customer to help them navigate whatever these changes are along the way. And To me, I grew up in the channel, right? My first job was a VAR. I believe in that channel ecosystem to be that trusted guide and counselor as you navigate changes in IT. And what this data says is only 2 out of 5 enterprises actually have that trusted counselor unless they're going through a GSI or someplace else. It sounds like new partnerships are going to have to be made. Otherwise, they are flying solo, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. And that shows about a third, if you give little less than a third of the respondents go directly to the VMware. And 2/3 are dependent on a partner. And surprisingly, almost in the majority there are still going to carry some level of partnership. But then you'll have nearly a third or little less than a third there that will have to find a new partner, a new structure, or go directly to your point. So we at Veeam believe strongly in our partner ecosystem, of course. So that's why we asked the question. So
Right.
This is some great information for us and for our partners in our ecosystem there. So, but some enlightening insights here.
Yeah. So, all right. So we've covered the angst. We've dug in a little bit on the problems associated with that. As we start to kind of come up a little bit, let's start looking towards the future. And when those CIOs were asked, okay, so what's the future look like for you? So we asked a couple 2-year out front-facing anticipation questions. The first one is, we started the question with, what's your current production environment look like? And so we asked, okay, so what do you think it's going to be 2 years from now? And again, the numbers actually aren't that different. If you recall, we had about 26% of physical servers. That only goes down to 20. Again, in 2024, if you're running physical, there's probably a reason for it. You're going to keep running physical wherever you can. Virtual machines was 41, steps down to only 39%. So you're only losing 6% of your physicals, 2% of your VMs, and then the net wash on that comes up on cloud hosted. I do think it's worth pointing out, though, that for many cases, this may not even be entirely migration centric. I think for many organizations, what we're actually seeing is that when customers or IT organizations are asked to spin up new workloads, they are taking a cloud first or a cloud smart strategy. And so new workloads may be spinning up in a cloud, and the net result is it dilutes the percentage of workloads that are still running on physical, still running in virtual, still running within the on-premise infrastructure. Bottom line, though, more than half workloads still running on premises. The data center ain't dead yet, and 2025 is probably not the year for that either. That said, when we look at how do we expand that green wedge again, okay, if you're going to be virtual, where are you going to go, right? In 2 years, when organizations were asked, okay, you need a new virtual machine, where would you prefer to run it? And I think preference is something that a lot of folks, when you're listening on the call today, think about not, well, this is where we have to run it because this is what we own. I think it's important for IT leaders to think about where would you prefer to run it, because that's going to also shape your long-term strategy and probably your year-over-year budgets. And for 27% of folks, they would still prefer to run it on VMware. VMware is not dying any more than the data center is. And so I think it's interesting that is top of mind. However, that said, 23% plan on running it within Hyper-V. Nutanix comes in as a fourth. Oracle virtualization comes in within the top 4 as well. You have to get to number 5 before you say the preference is a cloud host. So I like the idea that the preference becomes a lot more diversified than the, what would you say, 82% that are running everything on vSphere today. This is going to be a massive shift overall. Alan, that was the title of the webcast. I'm hoping this answers it, but I know we have more to say. What are your thoughts when you see that shift of where the market will likely be in 2 years?
What I thought was really interesting here, and you kind of alluded to it earlier on, is that the transition, the changes from what their current environments are, be it physical, be it virtual, or in the cloud, is relatively speaking very low compared over 2 years. And their preference slightly more towards a cloud instance, I think may also be, or their perception that that's happening, it may be in line with many organizations' move to a hybrid cloud environment setup. So it just reflects where organizations are generally moving on to. And they say, okay, now that we have to consider where we're going with our virtual environments, should we consider this environment in the cloud? Their preference may not be that as the right set of information is showing, but they are considering this move to a hybrid situation. And I think that is going to be a reflective of the reality that we're going forward, where we're going to have this hybrid setup, where there's going to be this continual transition, maybe different percentages, but this vision of hybrid of hypervisors in a physical environment, in the virtual machines, and in cloud instances are going to be, I think, going forward. It's just what those percentages are going to be may change over time.
Really, really well said, Alan. All right, so one last piece of data from the Foundry research, and then we're going to start talking about solutions for this. And so to tee that up, the last data point that we're going to share, and by the way, this and a lot more data is in the white paper that Foundry published, so you definitely want to take a look at that. But one of the questions asked was, okay, so if this is the plan, right, and you're going to start migrating and script diversifying, et cetera, and you're going from a primary hypervisor choice to myriad other hypervisors and clouds, how are you going to get there? And so the question was, what tools do you anticipate doing it? And I actually really respect the 4% of CIOs who said, we don't know yet, right? I also think it's really interesting. It is nearly a three-way tie among the CIOs for which way that's going to go, right? So 4% don't know, and the rest is almost even money, working from the bottom up. I think it's interesting, 25%, that orange wedge says we're going to use a purpose-built third-party migration tool. And I'm going to tell you, most of those migration tools often tend to simply be PowerShells and scripts, and I'm hoping that most of those come from a partner or from a GSI, because otherwise it's like one step to the left of voodoo in order to get that done. So I'll be curious to see how that goes. We're going to skip the green wedge for a second, but we're going to go to the top answer by 0.5 percentage point. We're just going to spin up new servers and move the data. Now, I think that has a lot of interesting potential if the strategy goes from server to serverless, right? So if you're looking at things like refactoring and going to things like Kubernetes as an architecture, or you decide you're going to decommission a Windows file server and you're going to stand up Azure File or AWS file sharing or something like that, that's interesting because then you can stand up the service and the outcome, and you really do only care about the data. But if you actually think you're going to go from a virtual workload to another virtualized workload and you're just going to move the data, I don't want to think about replumbing SQL and Oracle and web services and the middle layer and .NET and reconnecting it to Active Directory. I mean, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with that, which is why certainly my favorite, yes, I'm a little biased, is that green wedge, right? So the idea of what if you could just take yesterday's backup and restore it into that new workload. Now, I'm going to point out to the kids at home, I don't color my beard. I have 35 years of backing stuff up, and I don't want to tell you how many 3-day weekends I've given up to do a migration project and then have it go bad on a Sunday afternoon. So I think it's really interesting that many folks are embracing backup and then reinstantiate or restore. We saw that from physical to virtual. I think we're going to see a lot of that from virtual to virtual or virtual to cloud, which is really, I think, the next crux of this. Alan, at Veeam, we call that data freedom. And I think you're going to own this part of our presentation. And let's talk about what data freedom means to Veeam, to our partners, to the customers, and certainly the executives that are struggling with the conversations we've been having today.
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you very much for that. And here at Veeam, we have this destination data freedom. You'll see a lot more of this campaign going forward. This is just one of the first resources that we're producing, and we'll have a little bit more on this going forward. But I wanted to give people a little understanding of what that means. How does it mean? What does it mean to navigate with Veeam in this destination, in this data destination journey that you're going through? We all kind of agree that applications and data are the livelihood of modern businesses that are vital to innovation and competitiveness and economic growth of these organizations. With so many new methods to build and run applications at our fingertips, not to mention the changes in the market that we've been talking about. Organizations are really constantly looking for a newer platform to adopt and applications to modernize. However, platform lock-in or vendor lock-in, inadequate support, or organizational misalignments are all too common challenges that see the best laid plans really crumble. But it really doesn't have to be that way. And Veeam is the #1 global leader in data resilience. We really deliver unmatched data freedom, essential to all business migrations, be it even to hypervisor. We make it easy. If you're moving to a cloud or modernizing your applications, no problem. We will help steer businesses to the successful journey throughout their intricacies of migration and modernization that occurs. We really try to ensure that your systems are resilient and secure and your data wherever it resides. So it is important for you to really take that journey with a trusted partner, with someone that is there for the long haul, and Veeam is that way. A part of it is to be prepared. You need to really be ready for your journey. Just as one plans a route using their GPS or compass, Veeam understands that the complexity of migrating and modernizing hypervisors and other environments and platforms are very important. We offer expert assistance in planning, mapping, and simplifying the process, really ensuring this seamless experience that won't really disrupt your operations going forward. And an important aspect of it is really this navigating this journey, where there's different options, different journeys, different environments where you may take it. So we have 4 basic pillars that we have around this data destination journey that we want to help you with. Hypervisor flexibility is one of them, where Veeam provides this flexibility, this holistic approach for data protection and security, really helping you with a backup strategy independent of your hypervisor, with support to various hypervisors, VMware, of course, but Hyper-V, Nutanix, and Proxmox, Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager, and even Red Hat OpenShift. Really an important aspect, that flexibility, and even the cloud vendors as well. In terms of migration and modernization, Veeam really supports that, the migration and modernization, be it of the hypervisors, as we mentioned, but also to cloud platforms, virtual environments or physical servers, and applications. So we enable you and your organization to optimize and leverage your existing storage and facilitate this turnkey backup service to meet your unique business needs. In terms of data mobility, an important aspect there as well is that Veeam provides businesses the ability to gain the flexibility and to move data across various platforms, clouds, even hybrid environments, and on-prem as usual. So allowing for this seamless data mobility to store and recover anywhere, really eliminating this vendor lock-in that you may not need in fact. So we also have this acceleration to the cloud as a pillar where Veeam empowers organizations to embrace their cloud strategy by providing tools for data backup, for recovery, and for archival. Whatever your needs and your goals are, is to really maybe even to rehost, to replatform or refactor, or even disaster recovery. Veeam is there to really help ensure a smooth transition independent of where you're going with your data. It's your data, you keep it independent of where you put it.
Alan, there is so much good stuff in what you just unpacked there. And I think really this is why Veeam is so passionate about this topic. Certainly, we have been the undisputed leader in protecting vSphere for the last 17 years. And so, as people are thinking about where they're going to go next, we have as much interest in it as they do along the way. But I love some of the things you talked about here, because as the data shows, up until now, many enterprises never thought about having to make a choice. Many enterprises weren't thinking about migrating along the way, and they had self-locked in to choose that one hypervisor along the way. So when I look at the Veeam story here on the pillars here, I think this is super interesting because as the data has shown, they are going to be making some hyperscale choices. They are going to be looking for going to cloud. In fact, Alan, I would argue that something similar to, when we saw at the COVID lockdown and all IT modernization, digital transformation initiatives stopped for nearly a year because you couldn't get in the data center. Right. I think this is a different forcing function here where we were going to see that same kind of rapid embrace of alternative technologies because the status quo is no longer tenable. And so I love how these pillars frame out because once a CIO says we are going to have to make some changes, this does give us a great path for helping them actually make those changes. So what else have we got from the data freedom story? Because I brought a special friend along to kind of round out our story for today, Alan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And this is kind of in closing. You all well know that our portability, our data format really delivers that capability of taking you wherever you need to go, independent of where you are now. Even it covers, even our licensing model supports that. It's an incredible opportunity for us to jointly help you move your data from one environment to another, independent of where that is, independent if it's a plan B, C, D, or E, really. So all this portability really promises to extend beyond your traditional backup and recovery. Really, all your workloads are covered wherever they are. So it's very important. But this is truly that environment where we're talking really about hypotheticals here. But why don't we bring in James, and he can talk to what's really, feet on the ground. What does it sound like?
So I want to introduce James. James is one of our enterprise SEs, absolutely one of our rock stars on the front line. And so we invited James because Alan and I have the luxury of solving the world's problems by PowerPoint. James has the luxury of doing that through zeros and ones and keyboards and mice and data centers and racks. And so, James, welcome to the show. First and foremost, would you mind doing the rest of your own introduction and then let's make it real for the folks at home.
Awesome. Thanks for the kind cue up, Jason. So I'm so glad to be here. I am an enterprise systems engineer. I've been at Veeam for about 3.5 years, and I've been in this space for a little under a decade. So I've seen a lot of things change. I've seen Veeam grow up into this amazing company with multiple facets, and we're really excited to talk about how Veeam and the cross-platform compatibility is really a game changer and a differentiator in the space. Where we're going to move towards and get a little bit more underneath the hood is to talk about how Veeam has created this world-class cross-platform compatibility. And really where it starts with is we're simply not just taking VMDKs and VMX files and moving them and copy pasting them into a different platform and just putting them somewhere else. We're taking that data, we're deduplicating it, we're compressing it, we're encrypting it, and we're putting it into a general file format called a .vbk. So this allows us to create general definitions of the underlying attributes of these machines, like the disks and the configurations, the network configurations, etc. And ultimately allows us to restore these general pieces of data to these different platforms using their native APIs.
So, James, I think this is really exciting because when you think about what that looks like, then it's kind of like, hey, I had a machine that was running on HP metal, and it burned down, and all I could get was Dell metal. So I'm going to put on something different, but I still know I need a C drive. I know I need a D drive and an E drive for the data. Yeah, the NIC is going to be different. You could make those same kind of arguments for I'm moving from VMware to Hyper-V or to Azure hosting or Amazon hosting, et cetera. So the idea of protecting what's inside of each VM and then just protecting the metadata from the outside, I think is really interesting. Also, James, you didn't mention the fact that because our data format's portable, it means that even if 2 years from now you're not using Veeam on all of your workloads, we still provide a utility. You can still unlock this and pull it where it goes because we're so committed to the industry overall. I am excited about what that means for long-term portability and viability of the product.
That's a really great point, Jason. A couple of things I want to touch on that you mentioned. One, data lock-in is not part of Veeam's DNA. If you back up data with Veeam, when you back that up and you've paid to back that up, you can recover it without any cost, without even a license at any time in the future. And that includes this cross-platform compatibility. So we're not locking you in to when or where you can recover this data. Additionally, our licensing allows for you to take the data that you're backing up, move it into a different platform, and that our license goes with that machine. So if you have a VMware machine and you migrate it into AWS EC2, that license goes with the machine and stays with it. So you really bring up a good segue into just what's fundamental to Veeam's DNA is that that data freedom and cross-platform compatibility. What you could see here is a list of some of the workloads that we cover. Includes up to 12.2, 6 different hypervisors, along with the 3 major hyperscalers in AWS, Azure, and GCP, along with other clouds like IBM and Oracle, et cetera. So this workload coverage is broad. And it has cross-platform to where we can take data from these platforms and put them into any of the platforms that you see on this slide.
Amen. Okay, let's make it real, dude.
Let's make it real. So we're going to get on the keyboard and we're going to actually go into and do a demonstration of a cross-platform migration from VMware to 2 different platforms. So to set the stage of what we're going to be looking at, what you're going to see is that we have a VBR server with 2 different repositories backing up the same virtual machines. We're going to have a local repository sitting in an on-prem data center, and this is a VMware backup. We're going to instantly recover this VMware backup as a Hyper-V virtual machine. Secondarily, we're going to take a VMware backup. Again, no pre-conversion process, nothing. We're going to take this VMware backup straight from what it is, sitting in an S3 bucket in AWS, and fully recover that VMware backup into EC2. So without further ado, let's go ahead and transition to the demo.
James, one of the things I think was really interesting about how you showed in that diagram was the idea of you can migrate from virtual to virtual or virtual to cloud. And we're talking about migration today because of the angst of the Broadcom VMware, the sentiment from the CIOs, et cetera. But in my mind, it feels like the only difference between a migration and disaster recovery is that you get to schedule it, right? We're doing this in the middle of the afternoon kind of thing, right? And so when you show the second example of going from an on-premise workload into a cloud, which you had no prep for, and then spinning it up there, that feels an awful lot like my data center is underwater, on fire, blown away through a tornado, and now I don't have secondary metal. I'm going to spin it up in Azure, Amazon, et cetera, and then go from there. So I love the idea that we can be thinking comprehensively around migration and around disaster recovery, because all of them are really about continuity of operations for the sake of the business. That said, I see vSphere up, which means it's time for the fun part.
It's time for the fun part. Yeah, and you bring up a really good point about AWS that I'm going to address later on about the data freedom story and how Veeam allows for the fastest type of recovery in AWS from a different platform. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're looking at a screen with what most of you on this webinar should be familiar with. This is the vCenter console. And the reason I start out here is because I wanted to show you the environment that we are going to be backing up. So these are all virtual machines that are sitting in this VMware environment. And now that we've seen the virtual machines that we're going to be using today, let's go into the Veeam console. So what you guys can see here is all of those virtual machines that I had in VMware backed up to a local repository. And I want to reemphasize this. This is VMware backups. This is not backups that have been prepared to move into Hyper-V. This is not some conversion process that happened beforehand. These are VMware backups sitting on a Veeam repository, ready to be restored to any type of platform. So without further ado, let's get into actually how we do this cross-platform migration. So I'm going to take this web server, for instance, and we're going to right-click and go into the Instant Recovery tab. So we go into Instant Recovery, and I'm going to take this VMware backup and recover it into Hyper-V. So for the sake of simplicity, we're going to keep it on the very latest restore point. Like we said, we backed it up yesterday. We're ready to recover it today. And where are we going to put it? Let's target the host in the Hyper-V cluster that we're going to send this to. Again, you could send this directly to a cluster in general. In this case, I have a single node, so we're going to target this Hyper-V node. And as it resolves the target directory, we are going to take it to the next step, which is defining the path in which this data is going to sit. So you could see here that this is configuration files and VMDK. Sounds familiar in VMware language. So Veeam is going to do the dirty work for you and take this and convert it into the configuration files and the VHDs that are going to sit in Hyper-V. So I'm going to multi-select this so we can target the proper path for this VM to sit. So I'm going to go to the C drive where I have a cluster shared volume, and I'm going to target this, and we're going to go next. Now,
so James,
in a migration,
I think this is interesting in that, you know, if you're moving a bunch of production workloads, not all production workloads have the same priority, right? And so being able to then say, hey, I need to put this on higher performance storage because this is a transactional database VM versus on lower production storage where I want deep, fat, and wide because it's a file server or an archive box, et cetera. Simply that one choice of I can choose where on my hosts are from a performance perspective, it was just that simple, right?
It was. Yeah, you're not just arbitrarily sending this data into a platform. You get to be very prescriptive of where it sits, and especially when you're setting up a new data center or a new data strategy, that could really start to pay off dividends down the road. So as we continue along, we're looking at is the network itself. Now, in a migration scenario, you might not want to directly connect it to the network, and you're certainly not required to do so in order to do a recovery. But in this particular case, to show you the functionality, we're going to go into this and we're going to select the network for this VM to be registered to so that it is ready to go and registered in the network of your choice. So we're going to move next. And then just a nifty little naming convention. You can keep the exact same name. In fact, you can keep the same UID if you'd like. But we're just going to add the suffix to this virtual machine so that we know this is a unique VM with the same exact data as it was in VMware, but restored over to Hyper-V.
Hey,
So
James, question
Yes.
on that. There's a bunch of nuances in this that get really cool, right? So the idea of could I test this in advance? Also, by the way, for anyone who does DevOps and you want to do third-party reporting, has anyone ever had an outage where they had an update or a service pack and then something went wrong and it took down 40% of the servers in the world for a day? You know, the idea of actually being able to proactively test something before it goes into production, James, I'm thinking this is the same model, right? So you could actually just spin this up and play with it separately. You could patch it, you could uprev it, you could do forensics on it. If you had a cyber event, there's a lot of different things you could do with, hey, I'm just going to spin up a second copy and call it something else who doesn't step on the original. There's a lot of power that comes out of this. Can I get an amen?
Amen. Yeah, absolutely. And you even bring up a really good point for me to segue into the power of the instant recovery versus a standard recovery. Instant recovery allows us to take this data and mount it to the platform of choice before actually doing a full recovery, and then maintain the deltas or the changes afterward with the choice to consolidate that in the future. And so we'll have more details about this as we go further along in the demo. But an instant recovery allows for a mechanism of, did this recovery work? Can I append changes onto it? And then do I want to merge those changes in the future as we commit it to a new platform? So great point, Jason. So let's continue on. We're almost done putting this into the cross-platform restore, and then we're going to show how fast and quick it is to do the instant recovery aspect. But before we get there, I want to highlight a specific feature with Veeam that is just a can't miss. We have to address this. This secure restore addresses the question, how do I ensure that I'm not reinfecting or taking the same problems that I have in my data center and moving them into another one? And this is the secure restore platform. Before we send this data off, we can perform a scan with your existing antivirus engine or get really prescriptive and use YARA rules to get very specific definitions on things that I want to look for in the data before I send it off. So a great example in a disaster recovery scenario, I want to use the latest known binaries of a known ransomware or known malware that has been infected. I want to make sure that this is not going to be sent into this platform. This is just a really great feature, specifically in the disaster recovery and testing spaces. For the sake of this demo, since it's just a migration, we're going to skip this for now. We're going to move on to the summary once it verifies these virtual machines and begin the instant recovery. So we're going to go ahead and finish this. And what you're going to see is that Veeam is going to mount these files, mount these disks into this platform, pre-allocate the disk, preparing for a migration, and then convert all of the guest operating settings to make it compatible with the Hyper-V platform. So this should take about a minute or so to perform.
So I got two questions for you as far as the nuances of this goes. First of all, you've used that phrase "instant recovery" a couple times, and I think it's important for the kids at home to know that is a patented feature that Veeam pioneered nearly a decade ago. The idea being, typically when you have to do recovery, let's say recovery business process because of fire and flood and all the other bad things that can happen, you restore the data. So there is a data movement, and you can't do anything until that last bit or block lands on production storage. And then you can recover the business process. That is not true with Veeam, and it hasn't been for a decade. Instant recovery means that you're going to use the copy which is in the backup repository and light it straight up where it is. And then once you know everything's working in the background, once the business process has resumed, then you get to then finish the process. And I know we're going to talk about that along the way. Also, James, you mentioned the idea of those inward components, right? So this VM used to have VM tools installed on it. Now it's going to have Hyper-V integration components installed on it. But we take care of that?
Yes, we do. So what you can see here is that guest OS settings were modified successfully. This is the portion where we're taking those unique aspects about VMware and what they do to the guest operating system and removing those and implementing what Hyper-V's version of that would be, and subsequently would be for Nutanix or Proxmox or AWS, et cetera. So that would be the step that it's doing that. And Jason, while you were talking, you mentioned about the power of instant recovery. I want to make sure that we highlight here the timing of this recovery. Right now, it's sitting in that instantly recovered temporary state before we migrate it to production. This has been holding for about a minute and a half, and the whole recovery has been about 2.5 minutes. So it took a little bit less than a minute for you to recover a 50 gigabyte machine and have it ready to go, workable in an environment. So that instant recovery where we mount it off of the backup repository, not recover it immediately, allows for the fastest type of RTOs to get these workloads up and running. And so this is how we facilitate this cross-platform migration when it comes to moving into Hyper-V. So now that we have this thing actually instantly recovered, let's take a look at it in Hyper-V. So this is my Hyper-V manager, and look what we have here is that web 01 restored with the suffix that we have is sitting there in this particular environment ready to go. And if we click into this, this is not just something that's sitting stagnantly. This is a workable running virtual machine where we can append changes onto it that we could later merge into production. So this is a living, breathing machine that you can use, that you can start operating. So if you're in a disaster scenario, instant recovery is the way to go to get these workloads up fast. And if we take a trip back to the VMware or to the Veeam platform, You're going to see instant recovery. It's sitting there. This is a temporary state. We have not actually moved the data from the repository into that platform production storage yet. And then this is where we will go to the migrate to production side right here. And you would press this button, and ultimately that would finish the migration of taking that VM and moving it into Hyper-V, along with merging the changes that occurred while it was sitting in this temporary state.
So I'm just thinking about this from a simplistic point of view. Let's say that you typically have your VMware and you have direct attached storage and it's running from there. You've got local storage attached to your backup server. How lovely is that? You've got local storage attached to your Hyper-V cluster. In this case, basically what you did was you said, I'm going to go ahead and define a VM on Hyper-V, but instead of running the Hyper-V's local storage, I'm just going to mount it to remote storage. That could be NAS. That could be, in this case, the VM backup repository. Right. So all I've done is I've just mounting it to remote storage. I've lit it up. I can make sure it's working. If it's working, you're going to click that last button. It's going to move the storage over. If it didn't work, the production workload is unscathed. And write this down. That's exactly what you want on any migration is do no harm. You've done nothing in the production environment beforehand. Okay, I know we don't have time to do the whole thing again for another cloudy workload as well, but can you show us that one as well before we finish our time today?
Yeah, absolutely. So to move on to the second part of the demo, what I wanted to show is this exact same VMware virtual machine is right now currently backed up into AWS S3 bucket. So again, we have the ability to directly take data and put it into AWS. And here's a key component: without any added licensing costs. The data freedom story that we have of the repository for us, it doesn't matter where you store your data. That's your decision. And ultimately, what gives us a really big advantage in this space is that if we're backing up data into AWS, what's the fastest way to recover it? Recovering it from AWS. If you're recovering into AWS from an on-prem repository, you're going to be limited by the WAN. In this particular case, if that data is already sitting in AWS, we're going to be able to use AWS's robust network to speed up that recovery process. So let's go ahead and go into what it looks like to recover, again, a VMware virtual machine backup into an AWS EC2 instance. So I right-click this same web server. I go to AWS.
Hold on one second. I just want to look at that really gorgeous pull down. Look at all the different ways that you can recover data to all those different locations that are there. Because we saw that some folks are just going to restore the data, right? So you could just take you could restore the whole VM. You could restore just the disk. You could restore just the files inside of that. So I love the flexibility. So for all those folks that said, I'm going to use a purpose-built utility, I'm just going to move the data over and then relaunch it someplace else. All of those options are in the same right-click menu. You went to the production workload, and then you get to choose your own adventure for where that data lands over there. I'm sorry, I think this is a really powerful screen that a lot of folks go through too quickly. So yeah, I'm sorry to slow you down. Take us to Amazon, buddy.
No, you're absolutely right. And in fact, this is a limited lab environment. I'm missing a couple of extra features that you would see in a fully robust thing. We were missing Proxmox. We're missing Nutanix. We're missing Oracle KVM. So there's a lot that goes into this. And again, super powerful story. So let's keep moving along and show what it looks like to recover this into AWS as an EC2 instance. So we're going to take that exact same machine, again, use the latest recovery point. And I have pre-registered my AWS account using an access key in order to have the permissions to put this into the cloud. And I want to make sure that I put it into the right region. I have put it in the wrong region a couple times myself. Make sure you designate it to the region of choice for your business. In this case, I'm using East 1 US in North Virginia. So now we're going to name the VM just for the sake of time. I'm going to keep it the same name. Those tags would be able to be re-registered as AWS tags if you're a heavy user of tags. And here I'm going to select the instance type. For those of you who are familiar with AWS or any cloud platform, you have a number of different instances to choose from that vary in size and scale. And so for this particular case, I'm going to pick a VM that most closely resembles the source virtual machine, and I'm going to bring my own license. So you have the choice for AWS to license this machine as it goes in, but if you have a license that can be transported into the cloud, you can bring it yourself. So I click OK here. And before I move on to the next step, I want to quickly highlight something. Take a look at this right here, the estimated price per month. Veeam has done the favor for you and is querying the cost calculator APIs of that specific region to give you an estimated cost of this instance per month running persistently 24/7. So a lot of people talk about how cloud costs can sneak up on us at times. We're giving you a quick, hey, this is the right instance, this is the right time, and maybe this meets your expectations before we actually do a recovery.
James, that is so cool. Because think about this. How many people oversize their production servers, right? It's like, oh, I just happen to put this workload on 16 cores with 128 gig because that's the box I had when I stood it up 2 years ago, right? That does not mean you should drop it onto a 16-core VM running in Amazon. And the fact that you can actually give some give and take on that, that is a bonus feature. So
it is. As much as I would love to have a 16-core, 128 gig of RAM on every single workload I have, we have to think about the money. And you can see that there's a ton of different ways to make sure that we're.
All right. No, go ahead, dude.
Yeah. So let's keep moving forward as we continue to recover this as an EC2 instance. So we have this virtual machine. For those of you familiar with AWS, we're going to select the network type, which is we're going to select a VPC. I've created a VPC for this demo within a particular subnet, and just for simplicity's sake, use the default security group with no public IP address. I'm going to click OK, go next, and again, we're here at the secure restore step. Before we send this into the cloud, how do we make sure that we're not reintroducing vulnerabilities into a different environment? And we can check this with the secure restore, either using the antivirus engine or Yara rules to go. So let's move on to the next. And then as an assistance, we use an ephemeral EC2 instance that will spin up only during the recovery process to aid in the conversion process of taking those disks and making them EBS volumes, to taking those VNICs and turning them into network endpoints on that particular machine. So this is where that helper appliance is going to get applied. I go next. I'm going to, give it a reason. We're moving to AWS. It's moving day. We go next. And then Veeam is going to do all of the dirty work for you, all of that conversion, all of the registering it into the different aspects that we have is going to be done automatically by Veeam, registered and validated as we move on to the recovery of it. So that is it for the demo. Guys, any thoughts as we conclude this demonstration?
My only thought was I should seriously have you on more of my webcasts and shows. No, great job. And you answered so many great questions along the way. Alan, I know we're coming close on time, but have you got any last thoughts for us, my friend?
Absolutely. Thanks, James, for this incredible demo. It was very, very impressive. Thank you. So for next steps, I want to just leave you with a thought or a couple of thoughts. One, the next step you need to do is really go visit Veeam / the link is there, Veeam /data freedom, which will actually take you to a copy of the PDF copy of the report that we mentioned earlier. But also you have interactive demos that will show you this and many other options in terms of where you take from and to your backup data. And also important to show is all the wonderful, incredible set of resources, technical migration resources. A lot of information is on that website. So make sure to go visit it, bookmark it, and visit it often. Another point that you might want to consider is attending our October 1st VeeamON Data Resilience Summit, which will have keynote speakers from around the world covering some very impressive topics all around data resilience and how to solve data disruption issues, both in October 1st and 2nd, depending on where you are globally.
So we covered a lot of information. Alan, thank you so much for championing this project along the way and certainly telling the Veeam story. James, fantastic job. walking us through how to make it real. And this is not marketecture along the way. But I want to give each of you 30 seconds. What's the key takeaway you want to make sure everyone on today's call walks away with?
The one thing is we only covered just a sliver of the information that was on that white paper. So make sure to visit that website and download the white paper for more incredible pieces of information. Another one is it's your data. Veeam is there to take you on that destination journey.
It works. James?
Yeah, I think especially when I see this in the field, proximity of that data of where it's going to be ultimately be recovered means everything, right? We can't outcode physics at the end of the day. And if there's one thing that I want you to remember is that Veeam gives you the freedom to store your data where it makes sense for your business, for your recovery objectives. So if you have the same piece of data, you're recovering it to your DR site and to AWS. For in the absolute worst case scenario, your DR site's down and we have to recover into AWS, Veeam gives you that freedom to do it without penalizing you with extra licensing costs.
And I'll back clean up on this one. This is all about continuity of operations, right? This is all around resilience of the business. And whether you are having to move a workload because of fire, flood, tornado, or expensive licensing changes, the mechanics to do it are exactly the same, right? And you can do it while the production environment is unscathed. You can move it to wherever you want it, wherever you want it, wherever you want it. And that's what makes Veeam different. On behalf of Alan and James, thanks for watching. Have a great day.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. What an amazing, fantastic, awesome presentation. And believe it or not, folks, our hour is already up. We are past time, in fact. So I'm going to wrap this up fairly quickly. All that's left to do now is give away the $250 Amazon gift card. And the winner for today's event is Corey Burns from Wisconsin. Congratulations to you, Corey. We will be in touch to get you your card ASAP. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. And thanks as always to you attendees for being here, for your great questions. It was a pleasure to be with you today. And that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.